skill of throwing is a very unique sporting skill that offers a unique set of challenges that are not found in other sports. Shot putting in particular requires a huge amount of upper and lower body activation with intricate neuromuscular control. Shot putters will often throw various weights and various sizes depending on the age and competition level. These shots can range anywhere from 6 to 16 pounds at the professional level, and they can be made out of various types of materials, from iron to plastic to, whatever else. Even when throwing, there is a different amount of techniques that even at the professional level vary. The primary two ones are the glide throw and the spin throw. The glide throw is where the shot putter starts facing backwards, does a linear heel kick with that propels them linearly across the ring. They'll then land in a power position and linearly drive to put the shot. The spin is more complicated, is considered more advanced. It involves facing the back, doing a kick and spin, and driving and rotating into a power position. From there, they will then enter the standard power stance, where they will then put the shot and try to get as far as they can. For this video, we will analyze a derivative of the shot put, one that isn't as frequently competed. What we'll be looking at is the stone put. This is an event that is competed in the Highland Games every year and is likely a predecessor to modern Olympic shot putting. The stone put will use a much more commonly accessible stone or rock. Usually the competition for these is anywhere from 8 to 26 pounds. Due to them being much bigger and less consistent in nature, the technique in stone putting isn't as consistent as a shot put. However, the techniques and derivatives of shot putting can be applied to stone putting, and they often are. The variation that we'll be starting off with is something that many beginners work to learn, and that is the stand throw. The stand throw involves basically throwing from the power position that was before mentioned. It looks like a split squat and transitions into a drive and rotation to put the stone. This position can be seen when you look at full throwing and when you pause it at specific key points. So this is actually a very important position and important skill set to learn. So we're going to first apply degrees of freedom. This is actually a very great concept to work with when applying it to throwing. Basically, Bernstein's degrees of freedom describes that early skill movement and skill acquisition should be taught by freezing certain degrees to allow easier motor learning, then unfreezing those degrees when the learner starts developing adequate skill. So basically, you were taking away specific joints and limbs involved in the movement, and then slowly adding in new joints and limbs as the learner develops adequate skill in all those additional degrees. So to start, stand throw and many techniques utilize a sequence joint approach. Starts from the ground up. So basically, you can think of it like a chain or a whip, where the force comes from the legs, goes up to the hips, then moves into the shoulders, and then finally the elbow and wrist. We can actually take that chain and literally build off of it and apply Bernstein's degrees of freedom to kind of build it up. So how do we do that? Well, we can start by literally freezing everything below the chain and starting with the arm. Basically, simple release drills where the thrower just keeps their elbow joint down and just puts the shot. These drills are very simple. They're great at teaching proper release mechanics. They don't go very far, but for a thrower that's starting to learn, that's perfectly fine. From there, we can then unfreeze the shoulder joint to start adding in a little more power. So now the thrower is starting to learn to sequence the shoulder into the arm and transfer that force forward. This is kind of the next progression that throwers will then try to pick up on, and the stone will usually go a little bit further. From there, we can then unfreeze more joints further down, usually From there, we can then go down to the hip and torso to allow a little more usage of the lower body, a little more in the midsection. So this is very useful. From there, we can then start adding in the legs. So now we're getting leg power. This is where the stone will start flying even further, because now you're getting basically the lower body involved, which is very powerful. From there, you can then take, more, I guess, more spacing or degrees of freedom. You can start adding in the feet. You can start turning the body a little bit more and basically moving into a full-on stand throw. So the next motor concept is feedback. And feedback is the info provided to the learner during or after they have performed their movement skill. This is very important to learn how to throw. It is how every thrower learns and improves in their event, and it gives them the knowledge needed in order to become more efficient and improve their throwing abilities. Firstly, this feedback can either be extrinsic or intrinsic. Intrinsic feedback is feedback that comes from where sensory information is picked up by the body's organs or proprioceptors. Examples of extrinsic feedback, obviously a huge one is how far the stone flew and the speed at which it was flown. So weather, the ground you're on, those are also types of extrinsic feedback. These won't be as relevant to a stand throw, but they can be very relevant. Basically, examples of intrinsic feedback. This can be the feel and texture of the stone. So how does the stone feel on your hands? How does your feet feel when it's in contact with the ground? The stretch and contraction of the muscles that you feel during the stand throw. And of course, the timing and sequencing of the throw. Secondly, this feedback can be, in particular, extrinsic feedback can be augmented. So augmented feedback is extrinsic feedback that gives info that cannot be provided intrinsically to allow facilitation of learning a motor skill. So if a coach cannot provide this augmented feedback, there will be improper motor development of the thrower. It is important that the thrower receives this information, as this is information that they cannot normally pick up on their own. So this augmented feedback also needs to be delivered at the right frequency. So too much can be pretty overwhelming, especially for a beginner, and too little will basically allow no feedback or no development at all. So this augmented feedback can be broken down into two main categories. The first one is knowledge of results. Knowledge of results is basically where the outcome information of the performance is given. So basically what we talked about here is, stuff like the distance thrown. This can also be a type of feedback that will kind of really motivates a thrower extrinsically. Many times throwers will get sometimes a little too obsessive with the distance they throw. Usually when you look at a thrower, the first thing they immediately look for in feedback is how far they're throwing. Another type of feedback that is pretty similar to distance thrown is where it landed. Did it come off too early? Did it come off too late? The next type of augmented feedback is knowledge of performance. So knowledge of performance refers to info about the movement done prior to the outcome or result of the performance. So this is usually the traditional type of feedback that we think of when we think of coaching. So some examples include turning, timing of the hips and torso relative to the shoulders, presence of a block leg and arm, knee extension, weight shift, the sequencing pattern that we talked about before, and proper release mechanics. You can give this feedback either prior to the throw being done or right after the throw is performed. Either one or a combination of them is perfectly fine. It's important helping develop the motor skill of the thrower. And this feedback is definitely harder to pick up on, and will often take years of coaching in order to effectively provide. Again, keep in mind the frequency and amount you're giving to a thrower. Too much or too little can often be detrimental to how a thrower develops. The final form of feedback is an intrinsic feedback called proprioception. Now, proprioception refers to the learner's awareness of where the body is, both consciously and unconsciously. So, basically, this is very important in throwing. It is, in essence, proper technique. So, an example is, let's say a thrower is landing way off to the side off a spin. Well, if they have good proprioceptive ability, they can see that. They make the adjustment of their body in space to then, fix that. This can also help fix any technical deficiencies or inconsistencies they may have. So proprioception is very important. In conclusion, the stone put is a derivative of the shot put. Throwing can be taught through the usage of two motor concepts. The first one is Bernstein's degrees of freedom, which frees the specific motor joints that are specifically tied into building up the power and speed of the thrower, then unfreeze those degrees when adequate technique is being displayed. The second is feedback, which can be delivered through multiple forms. So you can have extrinsic or augmented feedback, where you have knowledge of results, knowledge of performance, knowledge of the results, basically the outcome of the throw, the distance, direction of it, where the stone lands, can be a huge key indicator of how the throw was. Knowledge of performance, basically knee extension, weight, the movements, all that jazz. That's, a little bit hard to pick up on and definitely requires a bit of coaching and, different mediums to receive that feedback to the thrower. And the final form of feedback is proprioception. So this refers to the thrower's awareness of their body when they throw. Proprioception allows the thrower to develop and adjust their technique as needed and be aware of where their joints and body is when they are throwing. All in all, the stone put stand throw is a very complex event that takes multiple forms of motor development in order to build effective skill in.